I need more when she touched him, the old woman cried. The cowboy smiled. I'll do more. The town of Dusty Hollow sat quietly under the hot afternoon sun. It was a small town in the middle of dry land and wide open plains. Wooden buildings lined the dusty street. Horses stood tied outside the saloon and the general store. A warm wind carried sand through the air while people slowly moved through their daily routines. Most days in Dusty Hollow were calm and predictable. Shop owners opened their stores early in the morning. Ranchers rode into town to buy supplies. Travelers stopped by for water and rest before continuing their long journeys across the desert. But on this particular day, something unusual happened. Near the center of the town square, an old woman sat on a wooden bench. Her clothes were simple and worn, and her gray hair was tied loosely behind her head. Many people in town knew her. Her name was Martha. She had lived in Dusty Hollow longer than anyone could remember. Martha was known as a quiet woman. She rarely spoke much, but she was always kind. Sometimes she helped children with small chores, and sometimes she simply sat in the square, watching people pass by. That afternoon, however, Martha suddenly began to cry. At first, people did not notice. The town square was busy. A few men were loading supplies into a wagon. A merchant was speaking loudly with a rancher. 2 children were chasing each other across the street. But then Martha's voice grew louder. I need more, she cried softly. Her voice was filled with emotion. Slowly, people began to turn their heads. A shopkeeper stepped outside his store and looked toward the bench. A rancher walking by stopped in the middle of the street. Soon a small group of people gathered around the old woman. Martha, what's wrong? One woman asked gently. But Martha only shook her head and wiped her eyes. Please? I need more, she repeated. The people looked at each other with confusion. No one understood what she meant. More of what? Someone asked. But Martha could not explain clearly. Her voice trembled as she spoke again. When she touched him, it helped so much. I need more. Now the crowd was even more confused. Some people whispered quietly to each other. Is she talking about a doctor? Maybe she is sick. Maybe she remembers something from long ago. No one was sure. Just then, a horse slowly walked down the dusty street toward the town square. The rider wore a wide cowboy hat that shaded his face from the sun. His brown coat moved gently in the wind as the horse stepped forward. Dust rose behind him with every step. The rider was a tall man with calm eyes and a relaxed posture. His name was Jake Carter. Jake was not from Dusty Hollow. In fact, most people in town had never seen him before. He had arrived only a few minutes earlier, riding quietly into town like many travelers before him. But unlike most travelers, Jake did not hurry. He noticed a small crowd gathered in the square, so he guided his horse closer. The people stepped slightly aside as he approached. Jake slowly climbed down from his horse and tied the reins to a nearby wooden post. Then he walked calmly toward the bench where Martha sat crying. The crowd watched him with curiosity. Jake did not rush. He did not speak loudly. He simply walked forward and stood beside the old woman. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Martha looked up. Her tired eyes met Jake's face. Something about the cowboy seemed peaceful. Maybe it was his gentle smile. Maybe it was the quiet way he stood there, without judging or questioning. Martha slowly reached out and held his hand. The crowd grew silent. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she spoke again. When she touched him, it helped him feel strong again, she said softly. I need more of that. The people looked at Jake, expecting him to ask questions like everyone else had. But Jake did something different. He simply listened. He let the old woman finish speaking without interrupting her. Then he gently placed his other hand over hers. The crowd waited. Finally, Jake gave a small, warm smile. I understand, he said calmly. The people exchanged puzzled looks. How could he understand? Martha had barely explained anything. But Jake did not seem confused. Instead, he spoke again, his voice steady and kind. I'll do more. The simple word surprised everyone. What do you mean? A man in the crowd asked. Jake looked around the town square. He noticed the tired buildings, the worried faces, and the quiet sadness that seemed to live in the town. Then he looked back at Martha. Sometimes people did not need complicated answers. Sometimes they just needed someone who cared enough to help. Jake gently helped Martha stand up from a bench. "Let's start with something small," he said. The people of Dusty Hollow watched quietly. None of them knew it yet. The next morning in Dusty Hollow was quiet and cool. The sun slowly rose above the wide plains, spreading warm light across the wooden buildings of the town. Roosters crowed in the distance, and shop owners began opening their doors for the day. But something felt different. People were still talking about what happened the day before in the town square. The cowboy said he would do more. One man said outside the general store. "But what does that even mean?" another replied. No one really knew. Meanwhile, Jake Carter woke up early. He had spent the night in the small guest room above the town stable. It was simple, but Jake didn't mind. He was used to traveling and sleeping in many different places. He stepped outside and looked at the quiet street. The wind moved gently through the town, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from bakery. Jake tipped his hat to the baker as he walked by. "Morning," the baker said. "Morning." Jake replied with a friendly smile. After a quick breakfast, Jake walked through the town, observing everything carefully. He noticed small problems that many people had stopped noticing. A broken fence near the well, a wagon wheel that needed repair, a tired horse standing beside the stable. Jake quietly walked over the horse first. The animal looked weak and restless. Jake gently placed his hand on the horse's neck and spoke softly to it. "It's all right, boy," he said. The stable owner, a man named Tom, noticed this from across the yard. "That horse hasn't been feeling well for days," Tom said as he walked closer. "I don't know what's wrong with him." Jake examined the horse calmly. He checked its hooves and gently rubbed its neck. "He's just tired and thirsty," Jake said. "He needs rest and better water." Tom looked surprised. "That's simple." Jake nodded. Sometimes problems look big when they were actually small. Together, Jake and Tom gave the horse fresh water and cleaned the stable area. Within a short time, the horse looked much calmer. Tom shook his head with amazement. "Well, I'll be," he said. "You've got a good touch with animals." Jake only smiled. Soon, other people began noticing the cowboy helping around town. A rancher named Daniel was struggling with a broken fence near his small ranch outside the town. The wooden posts had fallen after a strong windstorm. Jake rode out with him and helped fix the fence before noon. "Most travelers don't stop to help like this," Daniel said while hammering a nail. Jake leaned against the fence and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Sometimes helping is the fastest way to move forward," he said calmly. By afternoon, the story of the helpful cowboy had spread through Dusty Hollow. People began greeting him warmly. Children waved as he passed. Shopkeepers smiled when he entered their stores. And Martha, the old woman from the day before, watched everything quietly from her usual bench in the town square. When Jake passed by later that afternoon, she called out softly, "Cowboy." Jake turned and walked over. Martha looked stronger than she had the day before. The sadness in her eyes had softened. "You kept your word," she said. Jake sat beside her on the bench. "I said I would do more," he replied. Martha nodded slowly. "You remind me of someone," she said. Jake looked curious, but said nothing. "My husband," she continued. "He was a rancher, strong man, always helping people. When he passed away years ago, the town slowly forgot how to care for each other." She looked across the square where people now talked and laughed more than before. "But yesterday," she said softly, "something changed." Jake followed her gaze. He noticed the same thing. People seemed lighter, more hopeful. Sometimes a single moment could remind a whole town of what it had lost. But not everyone was happy about this change. From a balcony of the large ranch office at the edge of town, a tall man stood watching everything carefully. His name was Victor Hale. Victor owned the largest ranch near Dusty Hollow. For many years, he had controlled most of the business in the area. People often listened to him because he had power and money. Victor leaned against the wooden railing and narrowed his eyes. "Who is that cowboy?" he asked one of his workers standing beside him. "Name's Jake Carter," the worker replied. "Just arrived yesterday." Victor crossed his arms. and already the whole town is talking about him. He watched as Jake helped a young boy lift a heavy bucket near the well. The people around them laughed and smiled. Victor did not like what he saw. Towns were easier to control when people felt tired and divided. But this cowboy was changing things. Victor turned and walked back inside his office. "Keep an eye on him," he told his worker. Meanwhile, Jake had no idea someone was watching him. He simply continued helping where he could. As the sun began to set over Dusty Hollow, the sky turned orange and gold. Jake walked his horse slowly through the town square. Martha watched him from the bench and smiled quietly. The cowboy had only been in town for one day, yet already Dusty Hollow felt different. But deep down, something else was beginning too. A quiet challenge was forming. The sun rose slowly over Dusty Hollow on the third day since Jake Carter arrived. The morning air was fresh, and a cool wind moved through the quiet streets. People were already starting their day, but something new could be felt in the town. Dusty Hollow seemed more alive. Children laughed while running across the square. Shop owners talked with each other while sweeping dust from their doorsteps. Even the horses in the stables seemed calmer. Many people believed the change had started when the cowboy arrived. Jake Carter was already awake, working near the town well. One of the wooden boards beside the well had become loose, making it difficult for people to draw water safely. Jake knelt down with a hammer and nails, fixing the problem carefully. A young boy named Sam watched him with wide eyes. "You fix everything," Sam said. Jake smiled slightly. "Not everything," he replied. "Just the things I can." Sam thought about that for a moment. "Are you going to stay in Dusty Hollow?" the boy asked. Jake looked across the quiet street before answering. "I stay where I'm needed," he said calmly. Sam nodded, though he wasn't sure what that meant. Across town, however, someone else was not pleased. Inside the large ranch office, Victor Hale sat behind a heavy wooden desk. Papers and maps were spread out in front of him, but his attention was not on them. He was thinking about the cowboy. Victor had lived near Dusty Hollow for many years. His ranch was the biggest in the area, and most people depended on him for work or supplies. Because of that, people usually listened to him. But now something was different. People were talking more about Jake Carter than about Victor Hale. Victor did not like that. One of his workers stood near the door. "That cowboy helped Daniel repair his fence yesterday," the worker said, "and he fixed the well this morning." Victor leaned back in his chair. "So he likes to play the hero," Victor said slowly. The worker shrugged. People seemed to like him. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. That's exactly the problem. Meanwhile, in the town square, Martha sat on her usual bench. She watched Jake working near the well and smiled quietly. Several townspeople had gathered nearby. "He helped my horse yesterday," Tom, the stable owner, said. "He repaired my wagon wheel," another man added. "And he helped my daughter carry water," a woman said gratefully. Martha listened to them speak. "You see," she said gently, "sometimes one good person can remind everyone how to be kind again." Just then, a tall shadow fell across the square. Victor Hale had arrived. The cheerful conversations slowly stopped as people noticed him walking toward them. Victor wore a clean black coat and a wide hat that shaded his serious face. He stepped into the center of the square. Jake finished fixing the board near the well and stood up. The two men looked at each other for the first time. Victor studied the cowboy carefully. "So you're the traveler everyone is talking about," Victor said. Jake brushed dust from his hands. "Just passing through," he replied calmly. Victor crossed his arms. "That's interesting," he said, "because travelers usually move on. They don't stay around fixing things." Jake did not seem bothered by the comment. "Sometimes small repairs help a place run better," he said. Victor looked around at the townspeople watching them. "Or maybe you just want people to think you're important," Victor said with a small smile. The crowd grew quiet. No one liked arguments in the town square, but Jake remained calm. "I'm not trying to be important," he said simply. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here?" Jake looked around the town for a moment. He saw the repaired fence in the distance. He saw the clean stable. He saw Martha sitting peacefully on the bench. Then he answered. Because people needed help. The simple answer surprised many in the crowd. Victor gave a short laugh. You think a few repairs and friendly words will change this town? Jake met his gaze. I think people can change a town, he said. Victor shook his head. You don't understand Dusty Hollow, he replied. This town runs on hard work and strong leadership. Jake nodded slightly. I agree. Victor frowned, not expecting that response. Jake continued speaking calmly. But leadership isn't about control, he said. It's about helping people stand on their own. Some of the townspeople quietly nodded. Victor noticed. For the first time, his confident expression faded slightly. He turned to leave, but stopped for a moment. Travelers come and go, Victor said without looking back. We'll see how long you last here. With that, he walked away down the dusty street. The tension slowly faded as people began talking again. Sam looked up at Jake. Was he mad? The boy asked. Jake smiled gently. Maybe he just doesn't like change. Martha watched the cowboy carefully. You stayed calm, she said. Jake tipped his hat slightly. Getting angry rarely fixes anything. The sun slowly climbed higher into the sky. Dusty Hollow returned to its normal activities. But everyone could feel it now. Something important was happening in their quiet town. The cowboy's kindness was spreading hope, and the man who controlled the town was beginning to worry. The next morning in Dusty Hollow began quietly. The sun slowly rose above the wide plains, painting the sky with soft orange and golden colors. The wind moved gently through the wooden buildings, and the town slowly woke up for another day. But this morning felt different. People were thinking about what happened the day before between Jake Carter and Victor Hale in the town square. Word of their conversation had spread quickly through Dusty Hollow. Some people were worried. Others were curious. But most of them were thinking about the same question. What would happen next? Jake Carter, however, was not worried. He woke early like always and stepped outside the stable where he had been staying. His horse stood calmly beside the wooden fence, quietly chewing hay. Jake patted the horse gently. Morning, boy, he said. The stable owner Tom walked over carrying a bucket of water. You're up early again, Tom said. Jake smiled. Work usually starts before the sun gets too high. Tom nodded, but he looked thoughtful. Victor Hale doesn't like losing control. Tom said carefully. You should be careful. Jake listened quietly. Then he placed his hat on his head and said calmly, I'm not here to fight anyone. Tom studied the cowboy's face. You really believe that helping people can change things, don't you? Jake looked toward the town square where people were beginning to gather for the day. Yes, he answered simply. Meanwhile, inside his large ranch office, Victor Hale was already awake too. He stood near the window, watching Dusty Hollow from a distance. The town looked peaceful, but Victor felt something slipping away from him. For years, people had depended on him. Now they were starting to depend on each other. And that had begun when the cowboy arrived. Victor turned to his worker. Gather the ranch hands, he said. We're going into town. Later that morning, people were busy in the town square again. Children played near the well, and shop owners greeted customers. Martha sat on her usual bench, enjoying the warm sunlight. Jake was nearby helping Daniel repair a loose wagon wheel. Suddenly, several horses rode into the square. People stopped what they were doing. Victor Hale had arrived with a few of his ranch hands behind him. The mood in the square became quiet. Victor stepped down from his horse and walked slowly toward the center of the square. His eyes stopped on Jake. Well, cowboy, Victor said loudly, you've been busy. Jake stood up from the wagon wheel and wiped his hands. Just helping where I can, he replied calmly. Victor looked around at the townspeople watching them. You think this town belongs to everyone now? Victor asked. Jake did not answer right away. Instead, Martha slowly stood up from her bench. Her voice was not loud, but everyone could hear her. Dusty Hollow has always belonged to the people who live here, she said. Victor looked surprised. Martha had rarely spoken in front of a crowd before. More townspeople stepped forward. Tom, the stable owner, stood beside Jake. Daniel, the rancher, joined them. The shopkeeper from the general store walked closer too. One by one, people gathered together. No one shouted. No one argued. They simply stood beside each other. Victor looked around and realized something important. The cowboy had not forced anyone to follow him. The people had simply remembered how to support one another. Jake spoke quietly. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he told Victor. "I just reminded people that working together makes a town stronger." Victor studied the faces around him. He saw determination, but he also saw something else. Peace. No one wanted trouble. For a long moment, Victor said nothing. Then he slowly sighed. "You know," he said, "Dusty Hollow used to be like this long ago." Martha nodded gently. "Yes," she said, "it did." Victor looked at Jake again. "You're an unusual traveler," he admitted. Jake gave a small smile. "I just try to leave places a little better than I found them." Victor thought about that. Finally, he climbed back onto his horse. "Well," he said, "I suppose a stronger town is good for everyone." With that, Victor turned his horse and rode back toward his ranch. His workers followed quietly. The tension in the square slowly disappeared. People began talking again, and soon laughter returned. Sam, the young boy, ran over to Jake. "Does that mean everything is okay now?" he asked. Jake looked around at the smiling townspeople. "I think the town will be just fine," he said. Martha walked over slowly and placed a gentle hand on Jake's arm. "You kept your promise," she said softly. "You did more." Jake tipped his hat respectfully. "Sometimes people only need a reminder," he said. That evening, the sun slowly set over Dusty Hollow. The sky turned red and purple as the town grew quiet again. Jake saddled his horse outside the stable. Tom watched him. "You're leaving?" Tom asked. Jake nodded. "There are other towns out there." Martha stood nearby. "You'll always be welcome here," she said. Jake smiled warmly. "Thank you." He climbed onto his horse and looked once more at the peaceful town. Dusty Hollow had changed, not because of one man, but because its people had remembered who they were. Jake tipped his hat one final time. Then the cowboy rode slowly toward the open plains, disappearing into the golden sunset.